Welcome to Reverb Roundtable, a weekly show that brings the brightest creative minds and digital producers in sports, entertainment, politics, news, and more to share their stories and strategies that will help you become a better leader and creator. Today, the Reverb team is talking about the one thing that a lot of creatives hate to hear: systems. Yes, my friends, we are taking on the idea that so many people believe hurt their creativity or that they just really don't see enough reason to prioritize making, to show you why systems actually hold a lot of power. The team members that we have on today's episode represent enneagrams 1, 2, 4, and 7, and every single one of us have learned to love systems for different reasons. We dive into why that is, the systems that we lean on the most, and dismantle the myth that systems inhibit creativity rather than making you more creative. Now onto this week's episode. Here's your host, Clark Campbell.
Thank you, Tessa. Reverb Roundtable, Reverb Team Edition. We've got William, Director of Production, Andrew Pelock, extraordinary editor and animation and graphics and fun stuff that I have no idea what he does, and Tessa, podcast producer, creative director, all kinds of awesome things. We're here to talk to you. We're going to hash things out. We have a big word that people love and they hate. But before I tell you the word, hey, Will. Hey, Pelock. Hey, Tessa.
What's up? How we doing today, Clark?
What's going on, Clark?
We're doing great. Y'all's cameras look so good. So good.
Would like to notice, none of us planned it this way.
we're adding a camera that can just be Clark's backpack camera to the shopping list in B&H.
Listen, if you're not watching this podcast, you should be. That's where
you can see all of our beautiful faces. You can see what is the not known but actual headquarters of Reverb that Pelock's sitting in. Like, people think we got this gorgeous production trailer that's like Reverb Central. What they don't know is that there's a little tiny house in backwoods, Cleveland, Tennessee.
A little tiny house, interesting.
That has fiber internet pipe to it and is our 80 terabyte kingdom of all of our projects. It's our central everything. And it's so unknown.
We get a lot of work done.
It's so unknown. I've never been there.
That's true.
Listen, it's super secret. It's kind of like the Batcave.
So here's the thing. There's a word that some people love and some people hate. There's a word out there, and it's internal, and it's a really challenging word because it brings big challenges and big conversations. And that word is systems. You would think everybody likes systems, but when it comes to practice, not everybody likes systems. And there is when I say that, they can be complex, they can be burdensome, they can be frustrating. And you also know you need them. But there's a book way back. It's a great book. Peter Senge wrote it. It's called The Fifth Discipline. This book is about the art and practice of the learning organization. And it's a book I read probably, 10, 12 years ago. Huge staple book for me, pivotal in learning that organizations have to be learning. You have to be learning all the time, right? We talk about that often. And Peter Senge unpacks why it's so important that you are constantly learning, which is where you get these systems from. And before we hop into systems that we've created, I want to say this because I said it's a lot of tension inside at times when you talk about systems. One of the reviews I read about this book, just kind of catching up on it, was a lot of people look for the enemy that's out there. But Peter Senge talks about, no. It's the enemy within. And so a lot of times you're looking for what's the enemy out there that we have to face as a company, as a team, as an organization, when really you should be learning every day, looking inside, because the enemy is often a lack of systems because you're not learning how to adjust in real time. So that's all I have. I'm bringing in the systems experts, Will Vest, Andrew Pelock, Tessa Vicola, to tell us about systems. Why did we need them at Reverb? And how are they solving our problems? I'm starting with Will because he's a 1 on the Enneagram. Will,
and he is the king of systems here. So
can I just start by saying, like, Sensei Clark right there. Like, that was a beautiful introduction that I wasn't ready for.
So good.
The Fifth Discipline is we had talked about that book a few weeks back, and it's on my Audible list right now, but I haven't started it yet. So it's queued, but I haven't listened to it yet. But yeah, I mean, I think it's it's a really interesting tension that we hold with inside of our agency, and in talking with all of our agency friends. I think a lot of agencies feel the tension, right? Is when you're trying to grow an organization, you need systems and processes in place that help you grow that organization, help you facilitate the work well and effectively. But there's two tensions with that. Is one, those things are hard to build, like they take time. But then Clark, I think we can both say with absolute confidence that the other really big tension point too is that we're just trying to get things done quickly. And so doing systems sometimes means doing things slower than you want to do them in the moment, because you're doing them a certain way instead of just like kind of bulldozing your way through it, which is what a lot of agency owners do. A lot of agencies top to bottom do. We do all the time as well. Yeah. And so there's this balance, I guess, between speed and I guess efficiency potentially. Sure. It's where like you want to move fast, move quick, break things. That's like the Elon Musk motto or whatever. And then there's also this other way to where it's like, if you have a system for everything, you might move slowly and way too slow to be able to facilitate the revenue you're bringing in. And so I guess the balance in systems is finding that middle point of what's keeping you quick and also what's keeping you in repeatable actions to where you can do something over and over and over again.
I said I'm going to turn this over to you, but I really want to throw this out there because we talk a lot about the word tinkering. And I think the three of you in this conversation probably are in the tinkering category when it comes to fine tuning and adjusting things. Yeah. But the more you're talking and I'm sitting here thinking about this, like systems, first of all, they create behavior, right? Systems like put people in, I like to say sandboxes. I don't like to say we put people in like tight pipes. Like we're not like moving people through water pipes. We're giving people more of a sandbox to move us down a direction. But in a sandbox, you can tinker. In a sandbox, you can learn. You can adjust. You have some room to move around.
Clark's talked about the fifth discipline as kind of like an intro to this episode. And I haven't read that yet, but I've read what I would probably, from what I'm understanding, it's like the intro version of the fifth discipline is by a guy named James Clear.
Oh yeah,
Atomic Habits. Have you read Atomic Habits?
So good.
Clark, have you read Atomic Habits?
A long time
parts of it. Tess has read half of it. Pilock hasn't spoken yet. Pilock, have you read Atomic Habits?
Here.
I thought Pilock froze for a second.
I have not.
It's okay. I got a bunch of technical questions lined up for Pilock in regards to our Notion database.
I know when to speak. He knows when to speak.
But James Clear wrote this book called Atomic Habits that sounds like a slightly distilled version of the fifth discipline. And it's all talking about the habits we build in our day-to-day life and the indicators that basically trigger when we actually respond in a habit that's been formed in our brain. But one of the key sentences he says in it is, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And that's a sentence that always stuck out to me because we all have such big goals. Like creatives typically have big goals. And then you find visionary creatives and like, you want to take on the world. There's so many goals out there. And I get to be privileged enough to be surrounded by visionaries in my life, Clark being one of the most visionaries I know. And it's a beautiful thing.
Do not apologize. You are the reason this company works.
Clark's vision is why we're having this conversation right now. And it's amazing. But within that, it's so easy to set these robust goals that you want to achieve. And oftentimes for me, especially as someone who probably lets work determine their personal feelings a little bit too much, it can be really hard. And it was really hard, especially in an earlier season, when we would set goals that we didn't obtain. And we'd oftentimes set goals that we couldn't attain due to us not being set up in the position to be able to attain those goals. And James Clear talks about this a lot. He talks about in the source of building habits, you have these key indicators that are going off in your life. They're triggers that happen around you that oftentimes they set up what you're about to do. Oftentimes they're triggers that happen in your environment. And so a lot of the focus of his book is talking about you need to rearrange the triggers happening in your life because those are what actually set you up for success. Typically there is a physical or a visual trigger that then dictates a habit that you do. And so with us, like we had to put something like Notion together because that was a trigger that, okay, well, now we can't actually start a project without it starting here. So with that trigger, then begets a good habit that lets you achieve those goals, which to me is, it's a basic concept, but was really revolutionary to me because I think that helped me realize, if I'm going to be able to achieve what I want to achieve, I have to put a structure around me to be able to achieve it. And it's that way inside and outside work. It's that way in personal life as well.
So one big thing with that like I kind of latch onto is like, I am definitely a creative person. I have had times in my life where I was very resistant to systems because I just was like, no, I'm just like, I'm doing my thing. I don't want to be like, you must work at this time with this exact thing. Because I'm a creative person. I bounce around with things. And so there have been times in my life where I've been like, absolutely not. And I've talked to other creatives that are also the same, where they're like, nah, I don't want your system. Like I'm going to do my thing. But the thing with systems that I find super interesting is that they save you a lot of energy. So systems are essentially muscle memory, and muscle memory means you don't have to think about it, which means that you're not wasting mental energy on it. And as a creative, it takes behavior. A lot of mental energy to do the creative work. And if you can save your mental energy for creative work, then you're going to do better. And so like learning where to not waste mental energy is where like systems have come in. And it's something where like now I'm very much on board. I'm a big fan of systems because I realize how much mental energy it saves me. And that's like across the board with teams, on your own personal life, everywhere, wherever you can save mental energy, that gives you the space to create really, really good work elsewhere.
You can leave this in this or not, but that is going on the short content creative stuff we put out.
That's the micro clip.
That's it. That's the micro 100%.
Content. Tessa, you're an Enneagram 4, right? Pilock, do you know what Enneagram you are?
7.
Pilock's a 7. Okay, so we got a 4 and a 7.
Interesting.
Andrew, what has been your reaction as a creative, but probably a much more technically minded creative than what people classically think is a creative? What has been your development when it comes to structure or systems within your creativity? Because I want to dive more into what Tessa talked about a little bit. I almost want to like pull out of her a few more things that we've learned together along the process. But you guys are an awesome pairing for this conversation, because I would say you're both creatives, but different ends of the spectrum on classic creative personality.
Yeah. So kind of from day one, particularly in video editing, I just got really tired of doing a lot of the same repetitious kind of techniques. So we do a lot of resizing, and instead of me manually selecting each of the different video pieces and typing in all of the different resolutions, I just spent some time creating a script that I push one button and it does it for me. And so that kind of plays into the muscle memory, except I'm just creating the muscle memory and then using it later.
Take me back though, like that's you've done that since you started at Reverb, but you have longer history as being a creative before Reverb. Like, were you always like that? Did you develop that, or was that always a part of who you were?
Yeah, I mean, I think I notice things that I do a lot, and I try to make them more efficient. I mean, that's to my core, I think, as an innovator. That's just what I wake up and thrive on. So I mean, prior to Reverb, I would have created all sorts of things that would have probably otherwise taken me a lot longer had I not, done it before, had experience, and then optimized it over time. So.
And then bounce back to you, Tessa. So when like I knew you through college, and I knew you in a very different phase of your career than what you're in now. But you've always been a creative, always growing up. You've done a bunch of different things, from writing to photography to design. That I don't think was more a part of your personality, but you have this other very free-flowing nature to your creativity. Is that right? Talk to that a little bit, but then also talk about like, how do you balance your free-flowing creativity with structure? Because I know a lot of creatives that I've met along the way view structure almost as creative inhibitors. Like if there's a structure around me or a system around me, you're not letting me be free flowing. So a lot of creatives typically push back on any sort of structure. So what's been your like dance and development with that?
I definitely didn't come into it quite as naturally. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was creative on my own for such a long time. Like it really wasn't until college that I had to join in with other people and create stuff. And there's nothing I hate more than lack of clarity. I don't like jumping into something if I don't know what someone actually wants from me. And so I think part of why I am into systems and like some of the systems I built out like early Reverb was simply because I was like, I'm not getting the information I want. Therefore, I'm going to build this because I can't be creative because I'm stressed because I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I feel like a lot of my love for systems is essentially like, let me bring down my stress level because I know that I'm not as creative under an unnecessary pressure. There's a difference between pressures and necessary pressure. Like we all thrive under it, but like unnecessary pressure, get rid of it. And so I think that's part of it is like, I've always been someone who loves clarity and I love efficiency, which people always kind of felt weird with my creativity it's like, I'm very, very creative, but I want things to work efficiently. But because I wasn't working with a team, it didn't really matter what I did because I was the only one having to deal with the problem that my chaos caused. So that was part of it. So what was the second half of that question?
So I mean, part of structure being brought into the creative process that can be difficult and taxing, and it's difficult and taxing for me at times. I've seen it be difficult and taxing for pretty much everyone I've ever worked with, is there's the structure side of it, and this is how you need to do it. So that's more like technique and process of, well, what if I want to do it in a different way? But then there's also the structure in the how to get to the final project, who has say in it, the overseeing, the quality checking of everything. And of course, as you grow a part of a team, that absolutely is an added layer of complexity that a lot of creatives can have difficulty with. And it's inevitable as you're working for other people, helping other people achieve bigger goals than the projects you'd be working on solo. Other people's opinions are brought into the mix, and that's just as much a part of the structure and system as anything else. And I know I've had many conversations with people that even if they won't say it directly themselves, what they feel is that other people's opinions being brought into their creative process is inherently limiting to them. I don't see that personally, though I can get the tension in it because it can feel really frustrating at times. But I think we all know that ultimately that conversation situation can empower the work to go farther than an individual could take it by themselves. But what's the process in figuring that out and dealing with that for you and PLOC for you as well? Was that something that was difficult for you guys as you went from working solo to PLOC work for another team before ours and then you came onto ours? Or is that pretty free flowing for you guys and natural?
So at a high level perspective, creative processes that we do, particularly in video and graphic design, we don't really have like unilateral standards that like everybody's taught. And that's kind of unique to our industry. So like a lot of industries have standards, which is like, if you're going to do A, you have to do, X, Y, and Z. But that doesn't really exist for us. Like we have a lot of say and a lot of like freedom to, if you want to make your project file look like my 2-year-old's bedroom, you can do that. And a lot of people do, and the product is fine. But then when it comes to collaborating, which we do every single day in our company, I'm constantly opening up project files that other people have worked on. Yeah. And if I have to spend 30 minutes just digging around to find the sequence that I'm trying to edit, well, that's 30 minutes I'm not getting back. And that's 30 minutes that could have been spent actually doing work. And so you kind of you dig yourself into a hole the further you go into a non-standardized workflow. And then, it makes it even harder to then not just other people work on your stuff, but then for you to work with other people as well is a challenge. So I think having those standards, to me, it's a comfort because I know if I have to pick something up after somebody or hand something off, I know that they're going to know where to look and how to find the things that they're supposed to ultimately be working on.
Collaboration is such a big part of that when you're working on a team. Like when you're by yourself, once again, it doesn't matter. You can build it whatever. You're going to remember where it is. It's like walking into your room and like knowing this is exactly where that very random thing is. But if anybody else walked in, they'd be like, what? It's that same idea. And like Will and I talked about this the other day with collaboration of like, when you set up systems like that, it ensures that you're not gatekeeping something from someone else. So when people are learning, that's a big thing. I think that's a large motivator for most of the systems that we have, is like, we are so collaborative that if we didn't have it, our collaboration wouldn't go as far. And when you collaborate, you're better. Like that's just how it is. When people freely collaborate, the work you make is going to be better. And so taking that viewpoint of, it's not inhibiting my creativity, because at the end of the day, what I'm making isn't about me. And I think that's the biggest thing, is if you're going to work in a team, you have to know what you're making. It's not yours. It's not your baby. Like this is something you're making for someone else. Therefore, when you bring other people in, it's going to be better. And when you open yourself up to be fully creative with other people, it will be better, because you're not treating it as it's mine and it has to be this way. When you open up your hands and you let it go, then it's going to go further. And also, you're not going to get hurt about it, because your job was to create the thing to the best of your ability and pass it off. Your job was not to make it exactly what you wanted in your head.
I think to speak to that, a lot of creatives are typically known for being individualists and very free-flowing in nature and free-flowing in mindset. And that's definitely not always the case, but it's also a stigma for a reason. It's because a lot of creatives do act like that.
You shouldn't stereotype, Will, but you're exactly right.
I shouldn't stereotype, even if you're correct. It's not politically correct. But creatives are oftentimes known for being very individualist. And what I've found, and this has actually been a realization I've learned recently with some individuals that I've been interacting with on some projects, is that the trick of that individualism is that a lot of times creatives latch on to the work as though their worth is associated with that work. And it's understandable why that happens, because as a creative, you typically pour a lot of your heart and soul into a project. I know for a fact that it's pretty rare that when you're working on a big project that you're only working on it when you're sitting down at the computer going hard at it. Oftentimes you're working on it when you're driving the car and you're thinking about it, or when you're in the shower and you're figuring out how you're going to do this. And you see that poster on the side of the street, and that's some inspo that you pull. And so during this creative process, you're putting so much of your energy into it. And what I've noticed is that energy that you're pouring in starts to associate with your self-worth oftentimes. And then what's really tricky is when you have someone else come in and say, maybe this should actually be done this way, or perhaps this isn't the best solution because of X, Y, and Z. They're not just critiquing the project, they're critiquing you as a human, right? Because that was your self-worth that you poured into that project. So now you're critiquing me, which is obviously not the case, but it makes sense as to why people could get there and go down that rabbit trail. And then in tandem with that thought process and that line, I've definitely seen individuals that believe that their ultimate value that they can bring to a project is by them doing it, right? Because I'm being hired as a creative, so you're hiring me for my uniqueness. Thus, for me to provide value, I have to be the one doing it. I have to be the one coming up with the idea. I have to be the one facilitating the whole thing. Whereas the reality is, and some of the biggest agencies in the world and the creatives that have achieved the most, they're actually doing the least. They're just figuring out where they're able to maximize their potential in facilitating the project to get to the ultimate end deliverable that it needs to be for the client, for the agency, whatever. And so within that, there's a lot of release that happens within that. There's a lot of letting go control that's so easy to try to grasp onto as a creative. And I think with the systems process, like that's a little bit of a chip on that rock of like, it can sometimes be hard to play within a system that feels inhibiting. And I think secondarily to that, the collaboration layer of it, the working with multiple people, and ultimately having someone above you saying yay or nay to a lot of the decisions that are made, and that's just real life, is another chip on that block that can be really hard for a lot of creatives.
Yeah, I think part of that also is just setting an expectation. Like when you know who above you is making the final call, when you know like how far your opinion or thought on something can actually go, pair that with like trust within a team to have those conversations when appropriate. Like when you're down to the wire, that's not the time to bring up, well, we should have done this, this, and this. But having the trust that we all have of being like, hey, I think maybe if we do this, it would be really great. But then also knowing like if Clark is ahead of the project, it goes, that's a great idea, but we don't have time for it.
Yeah.
Then you have the expectation, okay, had my thought, move on, do the next thing. So I think expectation and trust is a big part of that conversation.
I got to talk with Josh Huggins, who's the president at Whiteboard. We talk about them a lot. They're some of the people that inspire us the most. And he talks about the big 3 fans. V's oftentimes. So he institutes this idea of having 3 V's in every single project. And those 3 V's are you either have a voice, you have a vote, and then there's also a veto. And then you ascribe which level of, like which V you have as an individual that's associated with the project. So you might have a voice. We want to hear your opinion, but truthfully, you don't have a vote. And then even to the people that have votes in the project, there's the painful reality that you guys might vote for this, but there's oftentimes still a veto above you, and they might ultimately call it off and veto at the end. And that's something I want to start working into our projects, because I think that clarifies some things to where I could know, okay, here's the role I am in this project. Here's the role you are in this project. You have clarity walking in. Pilock, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, I guess it really springboards off of what you said. Within those 3 V's, there's also differing levels of ultimate responsibility. So for me as a voice, let's say, as the person who's doing a lot of implementing, I may think that there should be a certain approach, but I'm not ultimately responsible for the product. The person above me has a bit more responsibility. And then the person with veto power is ultimately responsible as well. So like they have to best represent what the client wants. And that comes alongside, with that authority comes alongside responsibility. So if you can kind of frame where you sit in the stack alongside your level of responsibility for the end product, I think it can help alleviate some of that kind of pain point of, I really wanted it to be this way. It's not. If the product isn't as good at the end, I'm not ultimately responsible. If my voice is heard, awesome, and the product, that's what I want. But I'm not ultimately responsible. The client and what's best for the client and the client manager, they're the ones that have to make those decisions, because I spend all day doing all sorts of different tasks. I don't see the big picture. I see the small pieces. So, yeah.
Clark, speak to that. I know you have some thoughts brewing in your mind, and ultimately you get to be on a. Clark is, to clarify before I toss this to him, Clark's the most creative individual at this organization. He hired a bunch of technicians that ultimately end up doing a lot of the work, but Clark is pure creative, pure visionary, but is oftentimes not the hands-on creative within a project. And so there in itself lies its own set of tensions of having a vision for a project, but not being the facilitator and the implementer. Clark, go.
I just am sitting here listening to you guys, and I'm fascinated learning from you, to be completely honest, not to set up my point, but learning how you guys have realized or come to realize that it's not just about you. And I was reading some notes here on the 5th discipline, and I just want to say them because it's like we're talking about all of these things. And some of the summary notes from chapter 2, these are some learning disabilities that Peter Singe talks about. Learning disabilities when it comes to an organization that is not going after this 5th discipline. Number 1, learning disability. I am my position. It's like when people in organizations focus only on their position, they have little sense of like responsibility for what's being produced. And anyways, I am my position. Big, huge learning disability. Or the enemy is out there. There is, like inside of us, he talks about the propensity to find something to blame outside of ourselves when something goes wrong. And you guys are already talking about how we have to keep looking within. We have to keep looking within. It's not just me. It's me inside of a team. So how can I adjust to the team? Another learning disability, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to stop at 3, is the illusion of taking charge, that it's going to cause problems rather than help. We have to be willing, like Tessa said, okay, I've got to jump in here and create a system so I'm not frustrated, so there's not lack of clarity. Like, take charge. You're probably going to help more than you're going to hurt. So I'm just fascinated as I listen to you guys talk about the self-awareness that you have to naturally identify these things. And it's hard. It's stressful. It's super painful. It can cause butting heads way more often than any of us want. But at the end of the day, look how far we've come as an organization. From scrappy to just scrappy. So like we were real scrappy and now we're just scrappy. But I want to say this and I'm going to wrap what I'm saying. William Vest literally tackled the biggest systems problem we've ever had. And he came with a solution, the bigger solution that we've ever had. And I know you used people, but what you built inside of Notion, and I would love to give people access to see this Reverb Google that he's built inside of Notion. I don't even think we've done it justice in explaining what it is yet. Like, I would love for you to ask us, write us, tweet us, DM us on Instagram. We would love to screen share with you and take you inside of this Google he created. We went from almost, I don't know, just completely mushy systems to an absolute powerhouse of a system when it comes to managing the huge load that we have internally. So you asked me to talk. I just talked.
That was awesome. Sneak peek, new information. We actually badly, like the chink in the armor that I was talking about earlier is we know the steps that need to happen for almost every single project for us. Yep. Now we're running into having the human power to actually manage that. So we're actually hiring a project manager right now.
That's right. We are, if you want to apply for project manager. But this is a great point though. When did you build Notion, Will? When you had what?
Oh yeah. I mean, we built Notion when we had a deficit of work. So when there was
you had time. Right.
When there's space and time, that's when we actually were able to develop this. And that's actually one of my lifelong goals is to keep PLOC as free as humanly possible, because PLOC's my main tweaker, man. And so when he's free, we do like the most fun things. And we don't get to do any of those fun things when he's always loaded down with work. But Clark, I want to kind of go back to a little bit of what you said. And you were talking about the self-awareness you need in order to operate effectively as an organization, not think as an individual, but also think about how you're empowering the group at large. And I think within that, we've grown a lot in that, and we have so much farther to go. But what I do see having birthed out of Reverb in the staff that we've kind of gotten to now and the staff that we're growing to is more and more buy-in to that. Let me facilitate my role. Let me facilitate it really well. Let me do the best I can. Let me lead where I can. But then also the recognition that ultimately it's not about my individualism within a project. But that took a lot of time. That took a lot of energy. And I think that really speaks to your, truthfully, like very effective leadership within Reverb to get to that point. Like sneak peek, I was probably his most stubborn employee in that realm. And now we've got tons of other people a part of the organization, and there's still those types of conversations and I don't want to say arguments, but there's struggles every single day. In fact, literally a few weeks ago, we talked about, and I wish I had the 3V system. Like I wish I had known about it when we had this conversation, because it actually perfectly fits into this. We were talking about revamping some deadlines for every single project and making sure we knew exactly who needed to look at what thing when, so that we're maximizing everyone's time, but we're having the right buy-in as you go up the chain and the right overview and leadership per project as you kind of go on in the timeline of the project. We literally just re-looked at that a few weeks ago. So that goes to show like we're always still improving, but I think it's a cultural thing. I think it starts there. Like I know that myself, left to my own devices, I would default towards control more than release of control, because that's who I am as a person. And I've been able to utilize those tendencies of control in healthy ways, but I've also had to pull back on them on a lot of other areas in order to be healthy. But I think that speaks to leadership within an organization. And Clark, that honestly goes a lot to say kudos for you, simply due to that isn't something that you often find. You often have to create that type of mindset and that type of synergy within an organization. And I can say that firsthand because I've been a part of organizations that don't have that synergy, and I get to be a part of Reverb that does have that synergy, and we still got ways to grow. But I think that goes to show it has to be something you're very intentional about. Culture happens one way or another. Are you intentionally crafting the culture that you want to see?
And my response to that would be, I don't have a clue what I'm doing 98.9% of the time, right? I don't. But we're surrounded by people who pay attention to the subtleties. And the reason I say subtleties is this whole process of systems development is we forget this, Will. We all forget this, everybody. And I need to tell you this because I forget it too. Help me. Creating systems is as much about paying attention to the subtleties in our work as it is about the dramatic things in our work.
Yeah.
And it's so easy for us to go, there's a fire, build a system. Yeah. And it's so hard for us to go, look at that subtle thing that just happened. Yeah. We should build a system so that there's not a fire in like 2 or 3 weeks. And we go so fast. One thing I try to do as from a team lead is back up just a little and just kind of watch and say, hey, that was a fire, but there were probably 15 subtle things that happened leading up to this that could have cued us to making a better system. But
in James Clear's book, The Atomic Habit, he talks about basically the steps that happen that he defines as the habit loop, that anytime you do something as a human, it's oftentimes due to this habit loop.
Yep.
And how it works is you see a cue, which generates a craving, a desire to have a certain response. Then you actually do that response. And typically all that's triggered because you're trying to get to a reward, right? And so it's pretty systematic how he looks at it. And you see really negative habits and really positive habits coming from this exact same loop. It's all, there's something that cues you. You have an initial reaction that you want to happen in your mind, then you respond, and then you receive the reward, good or bad for you. And to your point, I think there's a whole lot of those habit loops. There's a whole lot of cues that get us into these default habits that we take as an organization, that if we can pause, recognize those cues, we can refine the approach. And it's astronomical the difference it can make if you've refined like an approach multiple times over and at different phases within a project, because you can save enough time to where something that could take weeks could only take days, or something that could take days could only take hours. And it's all about that incremental refinement. A whole lot of systems within a creative agency or within the work that we do in digital is often due, like they're digital programs that you use, right? Digital programs are so much part of your systems. Pilock, Tessa, Clark, what are your favorite tools for systems that you want to use or that you get to use every single day? Digital or non-digital, because there are definitely non-digital systems that can play a part of our day-to-day lives that we don't, as creative agencies, often give enough light to, because we're always so enveloped within the new cool program. So that's my question I want to ask as we end out to all three of you. Tess, I'll cue you up first. Give me your top three systems, tools that you use.
Well, Notion is right up there at the top. Big old fan. Another one would be that I have a full system for like my projects in Figma that just makes my life so easy. And then one that isn't necessarily to do with work, and I'm actually not great at this right now, is I used to have like certain playlists that I would play for certain things. So like in the morning, the same thing would always play and it would set me up for the next thing I was doing. And I think something like that's like not exactly a tangible thing where it's like every morning I listen to this while doing this and it helps get my mind set for the next thing. That's something I'm working on more now that in the past I found has been really powerful.
In the book Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about the necessity of creating environments that trigger you, cue you, set you up for success for certain habits. And so he talks about the necessity to have certain environments for certain things. You should have a certain work environment that is different from your play environment. And even if it's the same room, you need to set things up differently. You need to do things differently. I think that's super cool because I've never thought about music as participating in that specific environment. Pilak, what are your top three?
Top three. Number one would be the software we use for our remote editing, which is Parsec, because it enables pretty much anyone from anywhere to collaboratively work with us, and we don't have to put a hard drive in an envelope and send it halfway across the world. So it's wildly effective. Number two would be Discord, which is our voice chat that we use internally. It's just really, really fast. It's basically like a virtual cubicle. So it solves a lot of problems really quickly for us, which is great.
Especially for remote workers.
Yes. Yeah. Because I can just be in my, little space, and then somebody can just hop in, us have a quick conversation, they hop out. And it has been so much better than picking up my phone, or even a round robin Slack thread can take, because you're typing. It's always faster to speak than it is to type. So that's great. And then, I think
don't ever send me a speech to this an audio text.
The only time it's not quicker is if you're doing a speak message.
Yes.
Just kidding. Go ahead. Keep going.
And then, number three would be Notion. And it's just a beautifully deep rabbit hole that Will and I got to have many fun moments of light bulbs and freaking out that things worked. And it was just wonderful to build it from nothing to something that literally the heartbeat of our company is fed by. So,
yeah.
I just love using what they built from nothing.
Yep, exactly right. I'm going to give you 3 plus a special mention because 3 are personal, 1 is work. At the end of the day, when you ask the question, Will, my default mind goes to what's the behavior? Can I walk back?
Give me the
system?
rhythms.
Okay, there's a behavior. What was the system that created the behavior? Okay.
Yeah.
So the special mention is definitely Notion. I've seen the behaviors change. I've literally seen Reverb personnel behaviors change. It created a behavior in us. Notion did that. The 3 that I want to talk about are personal. They're not work, which you can make a case that are all tied together. Number 1, my Apple Watch.
Especially in our lives, they're 100%
especially
tied together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Apple Watch, go.
So my Apple Watch, my health and my fitness has astronomically increased since July last year when I bought my first ever Apple Watch. I waited for who knows how many years since whenever they first came out, the Apple Watch. The systems that they created that I adapted to have created a behavior in my life. And that is running, that is steps, that is exercise, 30 minutes, that kind of thing. It created behavior. There was a system involved that got me there. Number 2, I listen to classical music every single night when I go to sleep for 10 minutes. I set a timer. I put on classical piano. That is a system in my life. Every single night when I go to sleep, the system that I create that helps me go to sleep is classical music. The process of playing that playlist from Spotify created a behavior which now helps me sleep better, go to sleep faster. I don't lay there and think about things. And when I do wake up in the middle of the night and think about things, I play classical music and it turns my brain, creates behavior. The very last thing is coffee. I've created a different system with coffee where now I don't drink as many cups of coffee during the day, nor past noon do I really ever drink coffee. And what that has done is it's reduced my anxiety. So there's a new behavior that came from the system in my life, which was less caffeine, no caffeine after noon, and it reduced anxiety, which was a new behavior. So there you go. Those are my three systems.
I love it. Clark, take us out. You had a beautiful rap that I interrupted with this question.
No. I'm very hungry now, more hungry than I was 4 minutes ago. I'm going to go to Smoothie King. But listen, that's another system in my life. I've got more healthy stuff in my body because I changed my behavior there. We are so grateful you listened to that one. Thank Nicole. You're listening to the Reverb Roundtable. I hope this is a really necessary and helpful conversation for teams and individuals that are looking to make progress, that are looking to create new behaviors at work. We've given you 2 books to read. probably will be way more valuable than this whole conversation. But if you go read those 2 books, it will absolutely be worth this conversation. Atomic Habits by James Clear and The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. Go read them. Will, Pelock, Tessa, thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time on the Reverb Roundtable. It's been fun talking to our home team, sort of home team, remote team. Love you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Reverb Roundtable. Honestly, I love this conversation. I pushed back on systems for a really long time, but I have found that there is so much comfort in making the repeatable things systematic so that I can utilize my creativity in the work rather than the prep. Now, before you hop on to the next podcast episode, we have a present for you. Will and Pelock recorded a breakdown of our project management system that they created entirely in Notion. We literally could not go a day without the system, and honestly, it's pretty cool to see. So if you'd like to take a look, all you need to do is grab our show notes by going to rvrb.cc/podcast and subscribing to our email list. That's a wrap on this week's episode. We'll see you next week on the Reverb Roundtable.